updating my title, I see.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, hey, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Perfect. Awesome. I was
And you
getting
can,
scared. I was like, there's only 5 minutes. Oh, by the way, we are live streaming and everything.
sure,
But
no
I was getting,
problem.
um, I was like, where is everybody?
They have a background blur now, which I'm going to do.
What? Oh, I see.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. That's actually pretty good.
Yeah, I didn't know you could do that. Here comes everybody. For everybody that's joining, we are live streaming.
All right, terrific.
How's everybody's holiday season?
Real good. Hope everybody else's was as well.
Yeah.
Although, Chris, I was obviously you've got some more challenges. Sorry to hear about Jessica leaving. Good for her, but not so good for the city.
No, not at all. The good news is part of the reason that makes her so outstanding is that she's a team player.
Right.
And in this case, she's exhibiting that trait by giving us like the end of May as a time to prep. So
She mentioned that. That was really, really, really positive, I thought.
yeah, and it's not typical that you'd have have both the previous person and the new person at the same time. Usually HR departments don't like that. In this particular circumstance, we're going to make an exception because she's given us so much lead time and because there's just so much that she has in her head that she's agreed to sort of help train her replacement. And so I'm going to take her up on it.
No, absolutely. No, she's she'll be missed. She was a real asset, is a real asset, but good for her. It sounds like family. They've got the family things worked out and onto a new chapter, I guess. So.
Yep. That's a good way of putting it. I think a new chapter. So
At the
I think
risk
there's
of
days
sounding ignorant, who is she?
Oh, sorry, Jessica Sager, our finance director.
Oh man, that is a definite loss.
No other way around that. I could not agree more.
Absolutely.
For
But
those newly joining the meeting, we are live streaming.
We may be live streaming. Wait a minute. I got the audio, but I don't have video on myself. Oh well, no one wants to look at me anyway. So.
Oh, now come now. That's not. Paul,
hey,
everybody
Ethan,
hanging
I'm
in
trying
there?
a different set of headphones. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
This one. Paul, everybody hanging in there?
I think we're through the worst of it, but I don't know. We'll see.
Oh, Paul, is that you got a COVID thing going on?
No, it's not COVID. We've tested, but both my kids and my wife have been miserably sick. And so
sorry to hear that.
Knock on wood, I've been fortunate and I haven't gotten it yet, but all three of them have been out of commission for 2 or 3 days now.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Just to make your life brighter, Paul, I think I know what it is. It's a load of crud that was going around. My wife was stuck with it for 3 weeks.
Oh
wow.
my goodness.
Yeah.
Dave, you're not helping.
Yeah, I mean, she had a deep cough that really sounded pretty nasty, and she ultimately was, COVID tested and came up negative. But they thought, you might have a little bit of pneumonia here, kid. So
I'm sorry
It's
to
a
hear
bad
that.
one.
Fortunately, there hasn't been much of a cough. It's been mostly fever and vomiting and fun
okay.
stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. There's stuff going around, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just got an email from Jen Miller that says she needs me to
Bill?
forward her the invite. So I will
Hey,
do
Bill.
that.
And Paul, I just sent her that,
Okay.
so she emailed me too. She should have it.
Okay.
Mr. Lemaire. You're on mute, Mike.
Oh, hi, guys. Sorry about that.
Hey, Mike.
Back to virtual, huh?
Yeah, I think council's wanting to be cautious with this Omicron outbreak, but I do think this one's different than last time. I don't think their intent is to just make this a few months or multiple months ongoing. We could reevaluate this in a week or 2 weeks and go back to in person. A lot of the Tri-County and CDPHE information is that as quickly as Omicron is rising, it could fall just as quickly. I think it depends on if there's any new variants that pop up that are even more transmissible or some other variables. So they're wanting to sort of act more in real time, if you will, and be ready to go back in person like that.
Good.
So stay tuned. I'm hopeful that this will be the only one we have to do virtually. But
Yeah,
we'll see.
I know we've got that. I know we've got it on the agenda to talk about the cat, but my view is that if we can't have the cat in person, we have to push it off, because that would be that. When we did that last cat half and half, that was like, I didn't think that was very productive.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Earl.
Well, again, I think the tenor of this particular go around and this surge that we're seeing, it does from the experts, it sounds like it might be different. And
Agreed.
so, we could always push it back a couple of weeks. For those people that made plans, it may be disappointing to them, but I guess better than having an unproductive virtual meeting. So,
All right.
nice, Bill. I like it. What do you?
Good segue, Chris.
Look, congratulations, Bill.
Somebody's become an expert at this.
You're
on
muted, Bill.
mute,
But you're on mute, Bill.
as are you, Britta.
Okay, here I am.
Are you in your
Hello?
car? Yeah,
I'm in my car.
you
Okay.
are. You're driving and zooming.
I'm not driving. I'm parked. I'm parked.
Oh,
Trying to, though. I don't have you all on. I can't see all of you. I can only see one person. So I'll have to fix that.
Oh,
I think that's how it
Yeah, you
works when
probably
you're
have
on
it
the
on
phone,
the-
though.
yeah. Probably have it on the speaker view rather than the gallery view.
look, it took 2 years, and listen to how advanced everyone is at Zoom.
I know, I was just getting ready to say, talking as if I know what the hell I'm
Yeah.
talking about.
No, you guys are all power users, clearly. We're waiting on.
I was gonna say, so Dory is the only one who is not joined, but it is
There we go.
5:05, and I will leave it up to you guys on your call.
Ethan, have you reached out to her?
I'm in the process of doing so and have not heard back.
Bill, I don't know how much longer you want to wait. We could always get started. This is not a legal proceeding where coming in late would exclude anybody from participating. So
Yeah, so why don't we get the show on the road? Does it require a call to order?
It does.
And that's, I call this study session of planning and zoning to order as of 5:09 on Tuesday, January 11th, 2022.
Perfect.
What's that?
Very good.
Well said.
I have to grab the agenda, but there wasn't much to it. So
No.
No, Chair,
Turn it
with your
over, Rick.
permission, we'll jump right into the study session unless you have any other business you'd like to discuss first.
I have none. Do any members of P&Z have anything they need to discuss or offer?
No.
Nope, ready to dive in.
All right, bear with me while I get the PowerPoint up here. Okay, you all should see the presentation. Is that correct?
I don't.
No. But I have the thing that you sent out on another screen.
Just a moment here. Okay. Can you all see it now?
No. I gather you're struggling with your share screen, I guess, huh?
Yeah. Let's see here. Oh, well, that would be why.
Oh, there we go.
Yep.
There we go.
Success.
Look at that. You don't do it for like a month or two and you forget how. Good evening, Chair Lucas and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. There's nothing else on your agenda this evening except for our study session related to the master plan update. So we hope to get some good feedback and insight and thoughts from you all. I'll be doing kind of the introduction part of the presentation, and then as we discussed at our last meeting, there's some draft language for a vision statement for the overall document, and then some draft language for some potential guiding principles. At that point, after the vision statement, I'll turn it over to Britt Palmberg, our consultant from Rick Engineering, and he'll run through some potential draft language for some high-level goals. And then as well, we want to also start to look and discuss the second open house, which would likely be sometime in late February, early March, depending on how the whole COVID Omicron thing plays out here the next few weeks. And then Britt will kick it back to me and we'll talk about some next steps, specifically the CAT meeting that's scheduled for next week, get y'all's thoughts and potential direction on that. And then we'll finish up with some thoughts on what we would intend to discuss and bring to you at your February Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. So like I mentioned, the agenda for this evening, discussing our draft vision statement, some guiding principles. We want to talk a little bit about key topics and format for the next open house, get y'all's thoughts and feedback on that. And then again, preview what we have upcoming. As way of confirmation with this group at the study session back in December, we had talked as a group about the potential hierarchy of the document and what we heard, but we're looking for feedback for you guys. And I should have said this at the start, and I'll say it now, is as we go through these slides, please don't feel like you have to wait for the end to ask questions or offer thoughts or comments or things like that. As we go through these slides, please feel free to jump in and make statements and comments and things like that. So again, these study sessions are intended to be more conversational. It's not a land use case if you recall those types of formats. So as you have thoughts and comments, please, we welcome you to provide those to us. So getting back to the slide, we had talked about each potential chapter having a kind of a guiding vision statement, some guiding principles within that vision statement, and some underlying goals related to those guiding principles, which are related to the overall vision, and then some potential, we had discussed different names for what we would call them, but potential actions or actionable items that the city or boards of commissions or staff could undertake in order to implement those principles and those goals. We had also talked about kind of a general format or structure of the document. On the left is the current list of topics. As you all well know, the current master plan doesn't really have chapters. It just has some different topic sections. And so we had talked last time in December about potentially formalizing those more into chapters that would be formatted like the slide was previously. Generally a lot of alignment between the existing 2008 master plan and the 2022, the effort we're doing this year, in terms of what those chapters might look like. The two that would not necessarily be left out or necessarily checked off the box, but those two that probably didn't warrant their own chapter and would be folded into other chapters sprinkled throughout the document. Those are the two on the left in red, the Village Center and the Community Services. And then the addition of the Sustainability chapter in the 2022 plan update. And so before I get into the details of the language on this slide, one thing that we think we've heard, and we think we've heard pretty consistently and pretty clearly, is that folks not only that live in the village, but that spend their time here, i.e. The country clubs, schools, churches, kind of our non-residential stakeholders, really value what the village is currently. And so we're not looking at 180-degree turn in terms of what the vision is or what we want to be as this plan unfolds over the next 20 to 30 years. And so this is completely open for discussion with the Planning and Zoning Commission, but we felt like it would be appropriate to take the existing community vision in the 2008 master plan, which is on the left side of the screen, and potentially just tweak that and add some things that we think we've heard through the surveys and the open houses and just general conversations we've had with folks, and just tweak what we have to reflect some things or some key words, or in the case of the indented first bullet there that's in red, just some things that we think we could add to the existing community vision in order to update it and make it reflective of 2022 without starting over. And so this is kind of the first point where I would pause. And obviously this is the first time that the commission has seen this, and I guess I would just pause and ask for y'all's feedback as to whether or not, one, you like this approach, if you think it's appropriate or not, and two, what your initial gut reaction is to what's been modified from the existing language.
So Paul, just to clarify, essentially, if you look carefully, the text is the same between the left and the right, 2008 versus 2022. The words in red are the words that are new, and in some cases replaced existing text from the 2008 version, just to make it clear.
Thanks, Brett.
I guess I'll add a few other comments.
Based on the comments
Mhm.
that Paul sent out earlier, and I guess maybe it was last week or maybe it was yesterday, I forget. Sort of general impressions that one could draw from the survey. It seems fairly consistent that what people had in mind in 2008 has not substantively changed. About the only thing which perhaps stands out a little bit is the word quiet. And I don't know whether that's because of traffic or what, or maybe because of last year when COVID was at its height, that there was less traffic and things were more quiet. But overall, I think the overall commentary has not changed significantly.
And I would agree, and I would just add that, and I would just add that the addition of quiet, that was a word that we saw quite often in terms of the responses for the survey. And I think that that's something that village residents really identified. And so it was important to acknowledge that in some way in this larger vision statement. But I don't want to step on your toes, but that was my impression.
Well, that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, just going through all the survey results, the word quiet showed up quite a bit. A couple other things to note here. The word actions is now replacing strategies, but it could go back to strategies on that hierarchy that Paul alluded to earlier. We added the word enhance the established character. mainly because there seemed to be enough interest in, enhancing the character of different elements, transportation. There's enough there to put that word in, but I don't think it's a massive change per what you all mentioned here a moment ago. And then down below, vision defined by, again, the bottom bullet point is the same. The first one, you'll notice that the word semi-rural is not in there. It's more, this was crafted to really describe, from that first question in the survey, which received 20 pages of written results, how do you describe that character as opposed to using the word semi-rural? What attributes really, make up that character? And again, this is the draft. There's time to chew on all this, but that's just kind of some background.
And
Yeah, I guess-
thanks for saying that, Brett. It is we understand this first time you see it. That's why we've said, what's your, one, do you like the approach? And two, what's your gut reaction? Because we certainly can bring back something more refined at our study session in February.
All right. I guess, first of all, to that comment, Paul, I like the approach. So first of all, I like the way you're approaching this. That's number one. Number two, as we go through this, one of the things that struck me going through the comments is that, words mean different things to different people. And I think that's one of the things that we really need to focus on is as we're crafting this or whatever other sections, we add words or take away words, we think about what those words mean and then ensure that they can't be misinterpreted, by others. And we've seen some of that in some of the responses. So for instance, quiet, and see, I would have no problem with that, but at the same time, I'd sit back and go, taking a broader perspective, I go, okay, so what are we talking about there? What does that mean? Quiet. Some would say that having schools and athletic events at schools by definition means that it's not quiet, particularly in terms of if it was retirement homes or things of that nature versus obvious traffic noise. I mean, yeah, we just have to think through that in terms of what we think that means. Otherwise, the next thing you know, somebody shows up and just goes, hey, they start complaining about the school athletic events or things of that nature. Hey, that's supposed to be quiet. That's what the master plan says, blah, blah, blah. We should think through all of these types of things and anytime. And then the word enhance. I was struck by somebody a couple of times on the parks, and again, I view these as picky comments, but nevertheless, I was focused on them and they go, wow, what do you mean by develop? What are you going to do? We don't need to develop it. We just need to maintain it. I'm like, yeah, okay, well, that's to me the same one and the same thing. All I'm saying is as we go through this, we need to think about the words themselves. And then when we think through them, if there's a better way to say, and a more specific way to say what we're trying to do, then maybe we do that. And we don't want to do overkill. I mean, if we think that, we know what each one of these words means and it'd be unreasonable to interpret them any differently, then we don't worry about it. But that was one of the things going through all of the comments in the survey that really struck me broadly in terms of which and semi-rural is obviously the thing that we really talk about that people use back and forth, but they tended to make comments about some of the other words and descriptive phrases that were used and question what they really meant by that.
Could not agree more.
So let me just try and articulate what I think I heard, and then Earl, you can shake your head if it's not accurate. Is it's important to strike a balance of trying to put enough description in this vision so that it's actually functional and usable moving forward without putting so much language in there that we open ourselves up to the same issues we have today with the semi-rural, where different words can mean different things to so many different folks.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I mean, whether or not we need to limit the wording, we need to say what we need to say. And I just think that as we go through it, that is one of the things that we focus on, which is, I mean, it's okay. Okay, what do we mean by safe? What do we mean by quiet? What do we mean by low density? And it might just take 2 seconds to do it and go, hey, yeah, I don't think anybody can misinterpret that. Good, let's go with that. Versus, you know, as we discuss it, someone may come up with something, something broader and say, yeah, okay, maybe we need to use a different word then. We just need to make sure that what we're doing for current councils and future villagers is that when they read it, to the best we can, we try to limit the misinterpretations or the misinterpretations through language that might be more ambiguous than what we want it to be. And recognizing that, again, you can only take that so far because, you know, at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to resolve that 100%.
Just to chime into Earl's point on the quiet, would a word like serene maybe avoid the two different, you know, or the various definitions of quiet?
That's interesting. I think I think sometimes the solution to Earl's concern might be to make it more specific. And then sometimes in other applications that actually may be to make it more vague.
Right.
And that might be, I agree on quiet specifically. Anytime anybody's got a noise issue, valid or not, they're going to throw that around. So yeah, that may be one where it calls for a more vague description.
But I think this is, and Bill, thank you for that. That's a great example, a good idea of saying, hey, is there a better word or group of words that connotes what we want to do? Because I'll be honest with you, I don't, just as an example, I don't view the village as a quiet place. I don't view it as a noisy place, but I don't view it as quiet. You know, particularly on the weekends, there's always stuff going on. And, you know, you see what I mean? As opposed to a serene might be that's a great example of a word, and maybe there's even a better one. But getting across that idea without going in a way that that allows people to take advantage of it. And just kind of going down then when you did the vision defined by, where you say, you know, you basically took out semi-rural character defined by natural open space views and quiet and safe environment. And again, we've talked about semi-rural and getting rid of that, et cetera. But at the same time, does that vision defined by the new red words there, does that connote it's more than just natural open space? I mean, in other words, what we're looking for is, well, it is the semi-rural character, but it's like a better word than that. That basically is, you know, not talking about walls and high density and lots of houses packed in. And are we getting there by just saying the natural open space and views, or is a little bit more necessary in there to take the place of the semi-rural character?
Well, Earl, you could also take the opposite tack on that and some state the things that it should not be, right? Like it should not be paved, should not have, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
be a little more definitive.
Yep.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
to define things with negatives somehow doesn't work as well. The use of positive words and or phrases, yes, that may give people a false sense of security or set them to dreaming about things which are probably impossible to achieve. But defining something in negative terms, that tends to put people off, and I think could possibly cause them to focus more on what they don't like or what they don't want versus what they do want. Now, it may be difficult for a number of people to define what is it that you really want here. And maybe it can only be defined by what you don't want, but still using negative terms, it kind of leaves a bad taste.
And I basically understand and don't disagree with that, David. I think that what you can do though is by coming at it and saying, okay, it's not this. Okay, if it's not that, you know, in other words, that might be part of our process that we utilize with our open houses and what have you. Okay, what shouldn't it be? And for example, not paved. Okay, what's the opposite of not paved then? well, maybe it's natural environment. So I agree with you. You don't want the negative in there, but by raising those concepts of what isn't going to be, well then, okay, what's the opposite of whatever the negative thing is that we brought up? I mean, again, it's not paved. Okay, what's the opposite of that? Natural or something else. That might be the way to continue to try to help define or articulate what it is that we want.
In other words, you might make use of negative terminology to narrow the focus or narrow the scope.
In the discussions that we're having to try to get to, okay, what is it we're trying to say? Well, we're trying to say not this or not that. Okay, good. Then what's the opposite of that? That helps us get to trying to get the positive phrasing that we want in the plan.
Okay.
Well, and also think about this. If the purpose of the document is really to provide guidance to city officials and planning and zoning and city council as questions about the regulatory environment come up, if you're saying, if we're very specific about what it is that is not intended, I'm not saying we should be entirely negative, but if there is something very specifically that we do not want, and we clearly do not want in the village, laying that out in the document makes it pretty clear when the decision makers are going back to the document as a resource for their guidance. Like another example would be that I think has come up pretty consistently across both during the process and sometimes in our discussions at planning and zoning, would be this concept of the mega mansion and the people coming in and buying up contiguous lots, and people not wanting the character of the village to be this to be reframed as these huge mega estates either. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that would be another example, right? I've heard that that's not what people want, just as another example. So I think I do agree. You don't want to be a negative, but I think that there could be a case where we might just want to be pretty clear about what we don't want, like noise, which would be hard.
Well, let me offer this as well to keep the conversation rolling. Would be right now the second part of the vision is the vision defined by, and then it has 2 bullet points that have some different descriptors to them. Is maybe that's enough. Maybe it's not enough. Maybe we need more vision defined by bullets and characters or things like that. I wouldn't necessarily advocate for that, but that's one approach that may be an alternative.
Mm-hmm. One of the other things that I just noticed, and going through this, and again, I recognize this is the thing is I could have gone back and looked at the old plan and looked at that, but I mean, we're looking at this now and doing it. So, but as an example, the second bullet under vision defined by strategically addressing issues and pursuing village policy. The first thing that pops up to me is this village doesn't have a hell of a lot of policies.
That is true.
And maybe it should. That's one of the things we talked about, right? Is like, is this going to take this to the next step? But it's like, and I'd never focused on that before, but.
To go back to Britta's point a little bit about the mega mansions and so on, and Earl, your comment about lack of policy, it would seem to me that the whatever it was, Residential Standards Development Committee or Commission, whatever it was, approximately 10, 11 years ago, they certainly laid things out, I think, in a fairly specific manner with building footprints and gross areas and so on and so forth. Now, maybe that's an exception overall in your thinking to village activity, that is one area where we do have policy, but that is I submit, a major concern of villagers. And so there is a policy to address it. Whether that particular policy needs some augmentation or some tweaking, I can't say, because I'm not in building mode right now. But I think one other characteristic of the village, and it certainly was when I built here, was as long as you complied with the zoning, you could pretty much do what you want. Now, that was before the proliferation of subdivisions where you had covenants and that sort of stuff, which, personally, I can do without. What other areas would you have in mind in terms of policies?
Oh, I'm not saying necessarily that we should or we shouldn't. I'm saying that and I think you brought up a good example of one maybe where we do have a policy. But that's one of the things that I think, we have this master plan, which is really more of a guideline for councils and for residents and what have you. And that's been fine. And it is kind of like more guidelines broadly in terms of going, this is who we are, this is who we want to be. But policy to me is an enhanced level where it goes, hey, we are or we aren't going to do this, which is different than sort of more, this is who we are. This is, we don't do that here or what have you. It's, and I think that's one of the things we want to think about is that do we, and I'm not saying that we want to necessarily, I'm raising the question and going, as we go through this, and if you had that in there, by definition, it's implying that we do have policies. And if we aren't going to have any, or we don't have any, or we don't think that it's going to change that much, then maybe that bullet would be changed, because we don't really have a lot of policies.
If I might add something, I think as I look at this master plan, I understand it's a vision statement, but I also think it has to be strong enough by which policies can be established. And when I look at where this community is, and when I read the reports, and I'll go to the point of the mega mansions, I think this has become a place where you can build your 30,000 square foot home. Now, I have friends over in Greenwood Village, and I had a colleague who served on council over there. And he was telling me that they kind of look across Bellevue and think there's that's not going to happen in their village. Mike Shanahan, I'll just pick on him. He's not going to have that sort of house over there. And now there are some very large houses, and I don't know what that house is, but I think we've become a village that allows these trophy homes. And when you allow these trophy homes, we get away from community, because these homes have their own bowling alleys and their swimming pools and their basketball courts. And is that really what we want? And then I look at that hurts community, that hurts parks. And so when I look at this master plan, my thinking is it's got to have, I'd like to see it have a little bit of, this is what we stand for, and this is what's important to us. And these are really strong values. And one of them personally would be, there's got to be a limit to what you can build, because it's not sustainable. And I don't think it's healthy for the community. That's my own view on some of these mega mansions.
Agreed, David. And that was kind of my point as well. Not specifically that we should address policy, but that we should have this statement of our core values, so that when somebody comes to a future council or planning and zoning and wants the policies changed, the guidance of the master plan, they can look at the master plan and say, well, wait a minute, whatever you're asking us to change is not consistent with the core values of the community.
I'm sorry, this is Jen Miller speaking. Couldn't we argue that all the homes, relatively speaking, are much larger than the standard homes that are across Denver? And I don't know why building a mega mansion is truly an issue when those homes that are being built are energy efficient, more so than the homes that are currently in existence now. So limiting what somebody can and cannot build in our community, I just don't agree with it.
But Jen, I don't think that's what we're talking about. Like saying you may not like being that specific, particularly for purposes of the master plan. For purposes of the master plan, we're just trying to, David put, or Bill put it really well.
I thought so too, yeah.
Yeah, it's saying what are the core values of is our core value community and neighborliness and or or quietness or whatever it happens to be. What are our core values that we should be looking to when we go to set policy, or when policy comes into question? Another, a way that something else I think of often. So this projects 20 years into the future, or 40 or 60 or whatever it is. We have these tremendous parcels of land that 60 years into the future could foreseeably, we could be having to make decisions about. And what the character of what we want our community to be goes to those decisions. I think I definitely don't think we should be saying, oh, you can and can't build this and that. Like that's not what I'm saying.
Totally understand what you're saying, Britta, but the fact that we have these mega mansions already in existence, it may add to some confusion to the community as to what they can and cannot build.
Go back to a point which was raised earlier, I think by Earl, or maybe it was Bill. You also have to define what you mean in some of the language you use. We've batted around the term mega mansions here, and quote, we all know what we're talking about, but how do we define it?
Right.
Exactly, because it could be argued again that a 5,000 or 6,000 square foot home, which is not uncommon in the village, is considered to be a mega mansion.
But I think that's a little micro level for a master plan. I think we need to be talking and kind of, again, back to what Bill said, more of what are our core values and how do those translate and that's what we're trying to get in the master plan. Not the kind of this micro of some extent, I don't know, not articulating well, but and
I think
go ahead.
Yeah, Britta, I think you're articulating it quite fine. I think what are our core values as we perceive the village?
Right.
And it's got to give, when we come through this, it's got to allow the legislative branch to put teeth into it if they desire. It helps guide them that if they want to set standards, if they want to, on whether it's building code or whether it's streets improvements, whether it's how parks are activated, it helps them by saying, okay, this is the vision, but we do have to keep this big picture.
Yes, big picture. Thank you. Or even, do we want policies or not policies? Maybe we don't want more policies. Maybe we want to be just a small town, and so yes, I think the master plan we should stay more high level and more big picture.
But it can be opinionated. I
Right.
guess that's what I'm saying.
Bill, when you say core values, do you have anything specific in mind as to what constitutes a core value or values for Cherry Hills?
What I think is the core value is, and where I fear for the village is we're losing the sense of community because we're turning inward and we're building,
Right.
You've heard me talk about it, but rather than going to John Meade Park to play, well, I've got it in my yard plus even more, and I'll build a wall. And so it protects
Right.
me. And to me, we're allowing ourselves to turn away from our community. And I would like to see more community building. And I look at the master plan as an opportunity to help facilitate or foster that. That's one area, but I think it's an important area, and we're becoming inward rather than outward. And that's not only happening here, it's happening
Everywhere,
throughout,
right?
yeah, everywhere. But I think you really see it. And I think we have some things we really cherish, like our Highline Canal, like our, outdoor space, but we also turn it away and keep it inward. And I would rather see people participate and be more community minded in a general sense. Does that help, David? Kind of how I see it. And I think it's
Okay,
become
I accept your explanation. How you
Okay.
pull it off is another matter, but I accept the explanation.
And I think that's important about how you pull it off is another matter. I mean, as another example, for instance, and I think this is true, right, is the farms has the right to privatize all those streets. And I'm not saying that we don't want to take that right away, but I'm going from a standpoint of vision of the community. If we had our druthers, is that something we'd want? We'd want them to actually privatize those streets or not? I'd say we wouldn't. I mean, that's just an example of which direction do you go? I'm reminded, to be honest, of you before he became a sexual predator and before he was a TV star. It was an old Bill Cosby comedy record, and he was sitting back in a car, was speeding down the street, and he goes, "Hey, buddy, slow down. This is a neighborhood. This ain't no residential district." And that's 60 years old, that comment. And it always struck with me, which is to go, there's a difference between a neighborhood and a residential district. For instance, there's a difference between, take for instance, up in Highlands Ranch, the Highwoods. I mean, those are beautiful homes up in there, but man, the character of that vast quantity of houses and land is very, very different than what you find here. And those are mega mansions up in that area.
Well, so let me say what I think I've heard and offer some things that we could potentially work on between now and the February study session and see what your all's thoughts are on that, which is generally the vision statement, that first bullet, generally the approach of massaging what we have. That seems to be pretty agreeable, but really a lot of the discussion has been what I would consider in that second bullet, which is either the vision defined by or core values or whatever we, the collective we, choose to call that. And how do we articulate what we mean within the vision statement? What I think I'm hearing is we may need to put more meat on the vision defined by or community values or core values or whatever we end up calling that. So what I'm hearing is for us as staff and our consultant is generally the vision statement, some version of the existing version is acceptable, but really we need to come back to this group with some additional thoughts, suggestions, observations, whatever you want to call them, related to what I would just call those core values based on the conversation this evening.
Yes, more of a values-driven vision statement than a itemized vision or purpose. Purpose isn't the right word, but more of a values-driven vision statement. What are the things that we as villagers value?
Right. I think that makes sense.
I think that what Paul laid out is a way for us to move forward with that. And again, we have a lot of other, this topic is probably going to come up again multiple times tonight. I will just offer to you, this is those values my recommendation to you is to try and do your best to make those values spring from the community and a lot of the feedback that you're getting from the community,
Yes.
unless, this group or your own personal approach. Can that be a factor? Absolutely. Should it be the only factor? I would offer to you, probably not. That you really, and so that's why I think the survey, the open houses, the citizens advisory task force, those are all different inputs that you, I think, should factor into making a value driven vision.
No, and Chris and
Just
I agree with that. I mean, that's, as I've been raising questions and what have you, that's why I haven't, it might be frustrating because I haven't supplying a lot of answers to that, because it's exactly that, which is, I think the questions are good, but we need to find out what the answers are going to be by talking with other folks. But having said that, I do say, and I think Bill really, Bill and Britta both talked about this, but then Bill really defined it well in terms of saying, hey, how have we been slowly moving and how do we do the best we can to stop that inevitable walling off? Hey, I got mine, just leave me alone, and etc. And again, it's not just Cherry Hills that's doing that, but I think that's kind of that is a big picture type of a thing. How has the community been slowly moving over time? And is there a way to slow that down a bit and maintain a bit more of the community neighborhood type of a feel? I think that's a worthy thing to discuss and find out if the community feels that way, because that certainly is true, that we've been moving in that direction. And is that really what the people want? Because that's always the fear for, whether it's communities like this or organizations or companies or whatever, over time, the companies and organizations start to move in a direction. And, oftentimes you come back and you go, how did that happen? How did we move from here to there? And it's just this slow, it's the boiling frog theory. I mean, it's just this, and then the next thing 10 years go by and you go, man, we are really, really different than where we were. But it wasn't just like overnight. And I think it's what Bill said has absolutely been happening. So it's a legitimate thing to say. And is that by design? Or if it's not, then as a community, do we want to do something about it and start to try to pull back and go in the opposite direction? That's a worthy thing to discuss.
So, and believe me, I appreciate this conversation. I don't want to arbitrarily move it forward, but I do think that gives us a good transition into Britt's part of the presentation, where we talk a little bit about some high level goals and some draft language for that. Because to your point, Vice Chair Holland, is those are things, those goals, that these draft goals are ultimately things we can present at this next round of open house and whatever other avenues we choose to go down, and make sure that, to Chris's point, that we are in line with what the feedback that you've heard, and two, where do we need more information, where do we need affirmation, and where do we miss the mark, or whatever that is.
Sure.
So if it's all right with the commission, I'd like to transition from the vision statement into some of these high level draft goals, if that's appropriate with everyone.
Good.
You can go to page 2.
Chris, it sounded like you might want to say something.
Nope.
No. Okay. Uh-oh.
Oh, you're not.
There we go.
There you go. All right.
Although I think I missed one. Oh, no, we're there.
No, you're on the right one. So yeah, for each chapter, essentially, we've put together draft guiding principles, and the same vein as the draft community vision statement. What you see on the screen, we'll see on the subsequent screens. The text in blue represents text that was carried over from the 2008 plan. Text in red is either new text or inserted text or changed text, something like that, right? So this first one, community character. And again, we've drawn from, all the 400 some community survey inputs and what we heard at the open house, so on and so forth. Again, a lot of this is remaining similar. Enhancement, improvement of public, common, and private areas of the village, including streets, streetscapes, trails, and open spaces. Should emphasize, and the word semi-rural is still in there, that might want to come out. Pastoral, again, the word quiet's in here, so that might come up in discussion. Safe, quiet, and open character. But there's enough input from the survey to retain the point that says regulations on development should respect private property rights of all property owners. That vein still seems to carry through in the village. And then the third one, the villages, this is a new one or a fresh one. Villages Development Code and associated regulations can help preserve and enhance the desired character of the community. So the word that came up with the vision statement was the word enhance. Perhaps that is up for debate. But yeah, the community character, again, it's not a massive change from the 2008 plan. But again, just teeing off what you all just discussed here the last little while on the vision statement, perhaps this really needs some rethinking too. We'll see.
Just a quick comment as you're going through that, Britt, on your third bullet. Again, and this is just an example of going up, to more towards policy versus not. When you say the village's development code and associated regulations can help preserve, see, I'd say should help preserve.
Right. Yeah, again, it's to your point, a question of how policy oriented and how demonstrative the city wants to be.
Right, but that's an example of, do we want to continue to try to push more? I would say in that instance, we do actually, because that is what our development code and association reg should do, which is to, help the community preserve and enhance the character of the community.
Right. They're the tools that you all use month in, month out to help, really shape the character.
Right.
And I would say, as the ones on the front line, Ethan and I, that is truly one of the conversations we have with folks when they don't like a regulation is, well, the regulation is reflective of our community character, and therefore you have to do it, right? It leads to X, Y, or Z, or it facilitates, neighborly interaction, whatever the case may be. And just philosophically, as someone that will carry forward land use cases and zoning amendments and things like that to the legislative form of our government, city council, it's better, and there's more leg for us to stand on if there's more active language than passive language, i.e., to Earl's point, associated regulations should help preserve and enhance. So that's just 2 cents from someone that will use this frequently. And we can always come back if folks, if we get a couple slides down and someone's like, oh, I just thought about this for community character or whatever. But would you all like to stay on the slide for a few more minutes, or are you okay if we move on, and if we need to, we can come back?
I'll just add, and this is gonna, I know, ruffle some feathers. On the second bullet point, to me, it tends to contradict the third bullet point. And I think this is where things are changing, and regulations on development should respect private property rights of all property owners. I think there's a conflict that what one property owner might want to do might be a violation or detrimental or hurtful to their neighbor. And I'm just sensitive to the fact that I think we need to think more about how does what I'm doing impact my community, whatever that may be, and I have to be thoughtful, and we have rules that way. But I point that out because I look at this and think, all right, is that contradictory to what the point we're making in the previous slide. And I'm thinking, and I'm coming from the standpoint of how do we build our community? And I don't think it's all about what I want to do.
Well, and as mentioned, that second bullet point, it did seem reflective of a lot of the vein of community input and what you perhaps should call the libertarian streak in the community. However, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be called out as a guiding principle. And to your point, I think that's part of the discussion that could be very fruitful the next engagement with the community.
Sounds good.
You know, one thing we could do there, and it would simplify it, is you could almost combine those last two together and say something to the effect of the village's development code and regulations should balance respect for private property rights against the preservation and enhancement of the desired character of the community, because that's really what we end up having to do. You want to respect private property rights, but they need to be balanced against the desire of the community to maintain a certain character. And
I
that's
like that, Mike. Yeah.
I do too.
Yeah.
I like that. I like it,
Very
Mike.
well said, Mike.
That's okay up to a point, Mike, but the desires of the community are likely to be a very broad palette agenda, whatever you want to call it, whereas an individual property owner may have what he thinks is a compellingly good reason to do whatever. One of the problems that you run into there is when other parties who do not have a financial interest in the property start deciding this is what you need to do in order to protect the community. And in fairly short order, in order to meet the wishes and desires of the community, the individual property owner winds up with a much larger budget, so to speak, than he or she had originally planned on. When people do not have a fiscal interest in the property, or even an adjoining interest, physical adjoinement to the property. But if somebody who lives a mile away decides to chime in on what somebody else needs to do on a development project, where is that person's skin in the game, so to speak, other than the term sense of community or something similar to what Bill articulated?
Welcome to the central dynamic of conflict in local government today.
Yes.
I mean,
I would
honestly,
say-
the two of you back to back like that, well done. I mean, we could have a TED talk at this point.
Now, I'm glad Chris said that, because I was just getting ready to say the exact same thing. I think so I'll phrase it this way. It's my opinion, whether we keep them two separate bullets or some summarized version of both into one. I think the next layer down of the goals and then the actions, if you will, I think those are going to be critical for things like this, where what are we really trying to accomplish, and how do we balance a private property right versus a community interest?
It's a good
Okay,
point
well,
that
page
you know,
3.
the guiding principles are umbrellas, but the rubber hits the road when it comes down to the actions and those specific goals.
Right.
Agreed.
Somebody else had a comment I think they were about to make. No? Okay.
No, okay. And again, we can always come back to these.
Land use is pretty straightforward. It was the easiest one to compose. You all saw the input on the community survey. Pretty open and shut case. Predominant land use in the village will remain low density, single family residential.
Nothing
don't
to add
wanna-
there.
Yeah, I don't want to unnecessarily gloss over it, but to Britt's point, it did seem pretty straightforward.
I mean, there were a handful of comments. You know, you should take time and go through the detail analysis of the survey. You're struck by there's a few comments like, well, maybe we should look at housing for seniors, and maybe I would like a little coffee shop or something. And those stick in your mind. I was making the comment to Elliot today that when you actually go back and count the number of comments to make those specific comments, that people that make those specific comments is actually not a huge number. So when you start looking at the data, again, it is pretty overwhelming.
Yeah.
On transportation, again, there's some new information here, new content. So the words minimize cut-through traffic on village streets is retained, but we've also added along with that, and it perhaps could be a term like, while improving access to, but inserted the language about improving access to and from surrounding arterial routes. That seemed to be coming through in the input on the survey and from input from the community. The second one, we had this whole discussion at the CAT about low and slow, and a lot about safety, improve safety and reduce the speed of vehicular and bicycle travel through the village. That really comes from all the myriad of comments about bicycles and our discussion at the CAT in November about that. And then the third one, reduce conflicts between various modes of travel, vehicular, bicycle, pedestrian, and equestrian. That gets to anywhere from conflicts in the Highline Canal to conflicts on Quincy. I think that conflict topic is pretty key. And Elliot, do you have anything to add on this one? Maybe Elliot's muted. Or maybe
Yeah, when you're quiet for too long, you forget how to unmute. No, I think that covers it pretty well. Yeah, I guess another example of the conflicts is pedestrian and bike crossings at intersections or mid-block crossings, that sort of thing. So the conflicts, but both among bicyclists, other trail users, and also between bike ped and vehicular.
Right. So again, there's a fair amount of new stuff here. So
Right.
I'll open the floor.
Before I do want to say that we, in terms of the city and our consultant team, we recognize that this is probably one of the topics that we will need some of the most additional information in this next round of public input. And so while they're all draft guiding principles, I would say that these are draft guiding principles, just because we know that we need more information here. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut anyone off, but
yeah, very drafty. And this is, as mentioned in the write-up, the transportation sections where the results are the most mixed. So.
And that's what I was going to say. What you were going to say, Paul, is that we've got to continue to drill down to find out what people really want to do. And as we then put this together, I think it's important that we strive towards, and it's going to piss some people off, but we're not going to put down things that are just inconsistent with one another. I mean, and let's start with minimizing cut-through traffic in village streets. I mean, at the end of the day, there is only one way legally to minimize cut-through traffic. And that is to basically make the speed limits about 15 miles an hour on all streets and slow it down to nothing and enforce that, and no one will come in here. But then that's got other implications. But you can't minimize cut-through traffic any other way. I mean, because they brought up things like, you got to have a sticker to come in the village and ride on the, you can't do that. It's illegal. Okay. You can't minimize cut through traffic other than by making it in such a manner that no one wants to cut through here. It's too difficult. And then, and it was always interesting in terms of saying, you know, traffic then going through the residential parts of the neighborhood. The way you keep traffic from cutting through into the residential parts is to keep it flowing very well on the collector streets. In other words, if Colorado moves and Quincy moves, no one's going to cut down through Dexter and you know, to cut over there to Holly and no one's going to do that. They do it when the traffic slows down on the collector streets. And if it slows down, then on the collector streets and all of the streets, then no one will cut through. And I know just from the standpoint of being on council, I was always struck by this in terms of what the last master plan said in terms of going, there's just so many inconsistencies here. There's something for everybody. And we've got to strive to try to not do that. We've got to strive to be specific, and this is what we're going to do. And we're not going to get everything. And we're not going to try to do everything. We're not going to improve the ability for villagers to be able to move within and outside of the village and cut down on cut through traffic as an example. We're not doing that. That'd be my view. I'm just saying, because you can't. But yet the last master plan talks about doing just those things. Anyway, I don't want to get off on a rant here. I am going to get off on a rant. But this is the thing where I think that we got to dig down and recognize we're gonna, if we're true to what we're trying to do, and we're going to try to be as specific as we can and provide guiding principles for the future, there are going to be people that are going to disagree vehemently with this. And that's okay.
I agree with your point, Earl. There's one thing though that I think that we need to temper our thinking with in terms of cut through traffic. We have a state highway that runs right through the middle of us.
Right.
And as long as that's there, the proclivity or temptation to use, say, Quincy to cut through because the state highway is backed up half a mile from Bellevue. Well, people will then be probably, if they're going west, they might be tempted then to use Quincy to get over to Clarkson, et cetera. So let us recognize that yes, we can annoy/offend a number of people in an attempt to reduce cut-through traffic. But let us not be under any illusion that we're going to get to some point where maybe 80% of the population is happy as long as we have a state highway there. And that state highway is not going away.
Okay. It's well stated.
I have a comment on the second bullet point. And just when you look at it and you see the paved street next to it, it looks like bicycles and cars are speeding along the streets. And we might want to just say the speed of vehicular and bicycle traffic on streets and trails through the village. I think the biggest conflict that I'm aware of is speeding bicycles on the Highline Canal.
Here, here.
Not speeding bicycles on paved roads.
I think that's true.
Great comment, Mike. You're on fire tonight.
Oh, I finally woke up here. Thanks.
You look like an internet. I just got to say, this is totally irrelevant for the conversation, but Commissioner Lemaire, you kind of look like a man of mystery in the dark there.
Here, watch
One
this.
of those anonymous informants
there you go.
on the
Yeah.
news. There you go.
Just dropping knowledge bombs from the dark.
Knowledge is good.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this one before we go to the next slide? Oh, okay.
Okay, parks and open space. We did retain one of the guiding principles from the previous master plan of '08, preservation of open space areas and scenic views on private lands in cooperation with willing owners is generally preferred to public ownership and management. That still seemed to come through in the survey responses. The others are new ones, or at least modified. The village will preserve, enhance, and expand where feasible open space areas. And the design and preservation of parks and open spaces will focus on enhancing natural features and the natural feel of the village. The word natural came through very strongly in especially the first question in the survey, and came through in other questions that related to the parks and open space topic. One of the things which we might want to talk about here or in advance of the next open house, there were some number of people who talked about, hey, let's not forget about kids. There should be some facilities for folks like that as opposed to only natural. So I'll open the floor.
Fair point that you made there, because to me, the term natural means a minimal number of bells and whistles.
Mm-hmm.
And your point about the kids, yeah, so noted, playgrounds or whatever you wish. But it's a funny thing with open space, because I was able to get a look at a fair amount of the open space program in Boulder County back in the late 60s and early 70s, which gives you an idea how old I am. And initially, open space really meant undeveloped open space. There was nothing there. Well, then after a while, people wanted to have parking areas so they wouldn't have to park on a county road or something like that. Okay. And then paved paths so that people in wheelchairs could enjoy it. And this is, once that gets rolling, where does it stop? I'm wondering if the term natural features, whether we can find perhaps a stronger term which reinforces the notion that we're not going to have a lot of add-ons here. If that is, assuming of course that is what people want, which I don't know, but that's the inference that I draw.
Yeah.
Do you want to respond to David's point first, or?
Well, the word natural came through in the surveys very strongly, but still you did see some comments about, to his point, some people wanted to see parking areas. I think that the term natural maybe needs a drill down. I think that people use the word natural and blow it around all over the place. And to your point, Commissioner Wyman, that may be an area to discuss upcoming.
Okay.
That's my thought.
Yeah.
Apply the Earl principle to that word and try and suss out what it means.
Right.
So on bullet point number 3, open space areas and scenic views from private lands in cooperation with willing owners. So when I was on PTRC, we went out and tromped around the Calkins property, and were very instrumental in, they were not willing to really give us the right of way we wanted to protect the view corridor on Quincy. And we got the view corridor and said essentially that if you want this, I think it's designed for 7 homes. And they wanted to give a public right of way over on the south side. And PTRC was adamant about, no, we want it along Quincy because we want to protect that corridor. That was a prime case of a non-willing, owner, but that's not negotiable. And I think that's really important to the village. And we do want to protect our corridors. And so I think it's misleading to say with willing owners, because that's been a practice, and probably in a few other areas as well.
Any reaction to that comment?
Britt, in your analysis of the survey results, I mean, how much of a mandate came through on protecting
private property or protecting views?
views specifically?
Oh, there was a fair amount.
Pretty strong.
Yeah, pretty strong. If you look, it's all comes out of question one. The question one was the super meaty one with 400 responses. And we went through and analyzed almost every single word that was mentioned, kind of like a mass Wordle, right? And views came through pretty strongly, several dozen in favor of that, of preserving views. It was stronger than first approach when you just kind of skim through the survey. So I think that was
back on Bill's point. I mean, and because I can see this, would it be enough, Bill, in your mind, if you took out just willing? I mean, in other words, it's the preservation of open space, scenic views in cooperation with owners is generally preferred, because it is there. And I would say that even on the Calkins property, cooperation doesn't necessarily mean everybody's having a kumbaya moment. It means, hey, we're working together and we're going to work through this, and ultimately we're going to come to an agreement, which is exactly what you did.
I think you could delete the word willing without losing too much, without losing too much meaning. Bill, I think you had a comment and you're on mute.
You're still on mute.
I've got a quick comment while we're waiting on Chair Lucas. I think we're talking about two different issues here. When there's a subdivision and you have to donate land, that's one thing. I think this, where it says willing, is more purchasing open space or asking a homeowner willingly to put some type of preservation easement on their land, that we're not going to go in and condemn that land or anything like that, separate from a subdivision process where you're required to donate land. And then, yes, there is a negotiation as to, what land does the city want? What land do you want to give up? So I don't know if we want to separate those, but there are two separate issues here. And I think this one is more of, we're not talking about a subdivision process. We're talking about a piece of property that the city would like to see enhanced or preserved, but we're not going through some type of land use issue.
That's really a helpful clarification. I read it a different way, and that's really helpful.
Well, Chair Lucas, do you still think that the word willing should come out, or is that a good background?
Well, in that sense, I think it's fine. To leave it there. I was reading it as, thinking of the Calkins property specifically that we went through.
And again, you all can take time to think on it. And if the prevailing thoughts change by the next study session, we can also revisit it, of course. Paul, shall we move on to the next one, you think?
Yep. Let me just finish taking this note.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's apropos that, Jay, you were speaking, because the next slide is pertaining to infrastructure.
And much like the traffic one, I will just preface, this is another topic where we know we need more input.
Right. In fact, looking back at the 08 plan, there actually weren't guiding principles per se for infrastructure. So this is somewhat baking new cookies here. And these are, again, drawing from all the veins of input. First, the village will explore ways to improve the efficiency of providing water, sewer, and other basic infrastructure services throughout Cherry Hills Village. And so if you read those words carefully, that's where the idea of potentially combining districts together fits into their coordination of infrastructure provision between the different areas of the village, essentially, and with Denver Water and outside providers. Second, it wasn't like everyone made comments about having 5G, but there still was a vein in the comments about improving telecommunications, cell service that I'm sure you've heard about many times before. This one, the village will explore ways to improve telecommunication services around the village. So it's not saying the village will, it's saying we're going to explore ways, and that could be through, outside firms and companies and so forth. Third one, the village will work with other regional partners to resolve drainage and floodplain issues impacting the village. So, and that's something that, Jay, the city's already has done for many years, obviously. So there might be one or two more you feel want to fit in here, maybe something tied to Highline, perhaps, but this seemed like a good starting point for discussion.
Well, and while we're waiting to see if we want to add any more on there, that first bullet, and Jay may want to talk more about this, but we've got to make sure, because, and Jay can do a much better job of explaining this. I mean, we have sewer systems that the city is responsible for, and then there are other sewer systems that are not the city's responsibility. And I think we've got to distinguish between that, because at the end of the day, I don't really think we want the city to be taking on the responsibility for these non-city systems. Okay, this doesn't say that we're going to do anything other than explore ways, but okay, we're going to explore ways to improve the efficiency of these private sewer systems. Okay, what are we going to do? I mean,
I think a better way to state that is we would explore ways to assist private sewer districts or non-city owned sewer districts in consolidation of the infrastructure. But I would say only assist, because financially, those individuals using those sewer systems, water systems, are responsible for those.
right.
And I don't think residents, once they understand that they're paying into a different district and this other district is getting, the city's paying for their system to be upgraded and taken over. So I think we can only assist in these, trying to explore efficiencies and consolidations, because financially, I don't think we can go in there and take over those districts and run those.
Jay, would you say that from a policy perspective, that it's been established in previous times that the city wants to get out of the sewer business for the lines that it already has? Or is that topic not yet decided? Do you know what I mean?
In the time since I've been here, the policy, more of a, not a specific policy, but the thought of the elected officials and councils I've worked with is, let's get out of the sewer and business. Now, previous to me and previous councils and city managers had the idea to get into it. Now that stalled after the city took over 3 districts. And so we did get some consolidation. I know the Cherry Hills Sanitation took over some districts at that time. But it stalled because it's one of those out of sight, out of mind things where people say, well, I'm only paying $50 a year. Why do I want to spend money to consolidate and get rid of this? Where at some point they're going to have to pay that bill. But I wouldn't say it's an official policy, but I would say that's the policy I've heard in the time I've been here is, let's see how we can get out of the sewer business.
A little bit of background on the sewer business. When Cherry Hill Sanitation District was put together in 1974, this was a willful decision by the city council. This is according to Chuck Schloss, who was on council at the time and who, until a few weeks ago, was a member of the Cherry Hills Board of Directors. He has since passed away. The city wanted no part of a sewer district, and they made that very clear. And therefore, that was why they established the City of Cherry Hill Sanitation District. As for the consolidation which occurred a number of years ago. In 1990, there were 32 water and sanitation districts in Cherry Hills Village. And I researched all of this and actually did a brief presentation to council on it. And as a result, the city then took steps to at least get rid of some of the water districts by persuading Denver Water to move away from read and bill, or at least to allow the city to become the contract administrator. Because at that time, Denver Water would not do business directly with people in the suburbs. It had to be through a special district. The result of that was they called in Betcher and Company then to help facilitate the financial angle on it. And now I believe the number of water and sanitation districts is down to about 9. In the case of the 3 that the city took over, which were Cherry Hills, Rancho, Cherry Ridge, and Cherry Moore, I think part of the problem was none of those districts could get anyone to serve on the board of directors. And they basically threw up their hands and said, we don't know what to do. And at that point, for whatever reason, Cheryl Bone, who was then city manager, thought that it would be a swell idea if they would take it over. The funds that those districts had at that time then went into the general fund of the city, as I understood it, and were not segregated accounts. And so a number of years later, when these 3 districts needed significant work, this had to come out of general revenue. I would say, fortunately for city council, I don't think a whole lot of the residents of Cherry Hills were aware of the fact that there were, however many there were, 150, 200 sewer users who were getting an upgrade courtesy of the entire population of Cherry Hills. Now, you can correct me if I've got this wrong, Jay. And so I also, there was also a stretch from its inception in 74 through 2003 that the city did the admin side for Cherry Hills Sanitation District. And in 2003, the city council informed the board of directors of Cherry Hills San that we really don't want to do this anymore because we are concerned with liability. So go find yourself your own, go run your own show, which Cherry Hills Sanitation has since done. And I think also the liability issue, because if you have a sewer main break and any of that lands in Little Dry Creek, you're looking at trouble on the local level from what's left with Tri-County Health, the state level, and probably the feds. And I think it's certainly a reasonable concern by council that if something goes wrong in the city districts, their asses are in a sling big time. And the liability, I mean, if EPA decides to come after you and they see Cherry Hills, they may decide really to go to town on the residents and stick us with some kind of enormous bill. And I think that is the principal reason, the liability question, why the city wants out of the business. Long speech.
Well, I can't speak for the time before I was here, but as long as I've been here, that's always been a separate fund for water and sewer. So I don't know if previous to that, general funds were used and then an enterprise fund was set up, but those are segregated funds that stay separate from the village. And I think the liability is a big thing, but staffing is the other thing. We don't have enough homes to hire staff to maintain the sewer district. So it's just wanting to get out of that business totally because it's not something the city is set up to provide to the residents.
I think those are good points.
So I guess the question I would have for this group then regarding guiding principles for infrastructure is, should we make this a little bit more simple and just, if it's always been an informal policy, do we want to confirm it as a more formal policy? Earlier, Vice Chair Holland said we don't have a lot of policies. Maybe this is an opportunity to provide one. Just a question for thought. I don't We could do it a few different ways, just in an effort to keep the ball rolling.
Well, I think one thing we hear at the open house, and to some extent through the survey, if this is the direction, the policy that's kind of been the unwritten policy of the city the last several years, if we come to the open house and present this, what Chris just said, it sounds like we need to provide a little more background information, the balance of not boring people to death with the details, but also enough so they know what the heck we're talking about, right? If we're going to, memorialize this as an official guiding principle, what Chris articulated.
I think we can flush out a general statement that says, the city is not going to take over any water or sewer districts, but we will assist those special districts or private districts in trying to consolidate and safely repair their systems or something of that matter. We can come up with a statement that can be put into a policy.
But do we want to be?
I think that's right, Jay. I think it's that, and then and because I think this has been what the interest is that, and then with regard to that sewer system that we're responsible for, that we will continue to try to, like I say, these aren't the right words, but get out of that business, but in a fair and fiscally prudent manner. I mean, which is what we're doing, and what we're trying.
In the name of efficiency and.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Safety, and I mean, because when somebody calls into the city, right now, we have 13 different water and sewer districts. So when someone says, why am I getting this water bill or sewer bill? It takes us some time to drill down with an address and to figure out who they should be calling if they have questions. So yes, I think it would be much more efficient if the city was under a total service agreement with Denver Water for the entire city, and we had one sewer district running the entire city as a single system. There would be a lot of efficiencies in there.
I think we do need to tease this out a lot more in the next one, but it sounds like we have a good idea of what we want to tease out.
Right. Any comments on the other two bullet points here, or any other ones to add?
Do you think that the last point there is perhaps a little too bland? Now, maybe you can't make it any stronger than that, but it almost comes across as being a motherhood and apple pie statement.
Yeah, Commissioner Wyman, I read that and I felt the same way. And for me, I think that's okay at this stage. And again, this is my personal opinion. I'd be looking for y'all's opinion. I think that's okay, because I think the meat of that one's really going to come in the next layer in terms of goals and actions, right? What are we trying to achieve, and how are we going to achieve it? So that's my 2 cents.
Well, and the one thing that and maybe that is when you drill down, Paul, or maybe it's in another area, but resolving drainage and floodplain issues. Recognize the current master plan. I think it probably will stay the same, which is that the city discourages obviously any building and or any change to the floodplain. And we have residents that from time to time keep wanting to, develop within the floodplain.
Earl, I think that's a great point. I think the master plan, and I'm not sure what layer it is, but it's almost more of a value. But I do think that if we don't want to allow stuff in the floodplain, we should say it. Right. However, I will just tell you, we are going to need to caveat it. Whenever we get to that specific language and at whatever level we do it, we are going to have to caveat it, because we do have some entire properties that are in the floodway. And if we tell that person, yeah, you can't build there, the Constitution comes into play and it's a taking, and it gets complicated at that point is all I'll say. So whenever we get to that, and whatever layer, maybe the guiding principles are that layer, I'm not sure, but we probably should say it's the value of the community to limit and prohibit building in the floodplain with a asterisk or a whatever on top of it. But you know what I'm saying, right?
Well,
Right.
limit
No, no, I do.
or perhaps discourage building in the floodplain.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the current master plan basically says discourage new structures and improvements to existing structures within a floodplain, unless such improvements are in compliance with the village's floodplain regs, as well as any regs of the FEMA, state of Colorado, and urban drainage.
So as someone that enforces that section of the code with that section of the master plan, that's one of those at a staff level, I see conflict, right? Because it says, we don't want you to do this unless it's in compliance with this. So my suggestion or my offer to the group would be something more along the lines of strictly enforce the city's adopted floodplain regulations, something to that effect.
Is it really a vision? Is it really a master plan issue? Because
Yes.
it sounds like you've got it as part of the code.
Yes. Now, my answer to that is yes. I do believe it should be a part of the master plan because it gives teeth to and it gives community support to those regulations. Right. One of the roles of this master plan is to help us ensure that our regulations match the community vision and desire and all that in the master plan. So yes, we will use sections like this, not only when we develop that code language, but when we review the applications to make sure that it's consistent with this stuff. So my opinion, my suggestion is yes, we should discuss it in the master plan.
And not to be a pessimist, but should the legality of any one of our code sections gets called into court, having a means of inspiration coming from our master plan, courts always find that compelling. Yes, we absolutely should talk about that as a value in our master plan.
Right.
Right. Good to know.
Anything else on this slide before we move on? Hearing none.
Okay, so sustainability, as mentioned, is a new chapter in the 2022 master plan. And per what Paul mentioned a few minutes ago, some of these aspects of sustainability perhaps are covered under different layers down below with actions and different goals and so forth. These were intended to capture the broad input from the community and serve as the overall guiding principles. One, the village will explore ways to improve sustainability and reduce the environmental impact of city operations and services, including the use of renewable energy sources. So that's like the city side. Second bullet point, village will encourage residents and businesses to utilize strategies to enhance sustainability and improve the local environment. So, we've had these discussions myself with Paul and Chris and some others. This is not as demonstrative as perhaps you might see in another community. It seems like the flavor here is to be, thoughtful about sustainability, bring it forward as an important value of the community. But, we're not talking about getting into carbon audits and carbon plans and climate action plans necessarily at this point. That's a general comment.
But what do we mean then by, encouraging residents and businesses? I mean, I look at it in terms of, municipalities. Encouraging means, we're gonna give you a tax break, we're gonna do this, but it ain't just, hey, we're in favor of it.
Well, I think that's to be discussed, really. That's the details that
Right.
Interesting
Right.
coming out of this plan. Yeah.
Well, and I think that'd be the next layer down.
Right.
And I agree with all that. One thing I would say, Vice Chair Holland, is one example that just came to the top of my head because Britt and I were having this conversation is the way we process applications for solar panels on residential homes. So they still have to get permits. They still have to go through a building and planning review. But we charge building permit fee at a different rate. And Ethan, correct me if I'm wrong, a use tax on those, but we do not charge an electric permit fee for that. So that's one example of
Okay, then there is
of
some things.
encouraging. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, good. So there are some things that we could do if we use that language. Okay, well, that's good.
But I think your
And
point's
sorry,
well taken. This is where it could be very interesting discussion in the second open house and with the community about sustainability and how important it is and how far the city should go.
Right.
Other comments from the group?
Is Mike still with us? I thought he might have had some comments in this area.
And again, to reiterate, this is a draft. It's the first cut. It's time to go think on it.
Well, I know, Britt, that you are bringing in, as we get into this next level, you're bringing in some specialists on this particular topic.
Yeah, we're bringing our staff that are more focused on sustainability and have been more involved in that from an environmental planning perspective. Will be helping to craft that policy language and shape the choices for different actions going forward.
Hearing none,
Okay.
we will move on to open house. Brett?
Yeah, this is essentially a transition slide. Again, just kind of reiterating the topics, and we discussed this with you at the December study session. All the topics we had at the first open house we see carrying forward. Is just the subsequent slides here will get into this. What level of detail, what are the issues we're going to suss out, things like that. But these topics here that we all had in the first open house will carry forward. So we can advance to the next slide, Paul. So community vision. Again, we're going to have another cut at the community vision next time. And, at the first open house, we had all the stickies and people provide their input on vision, which really veered off into character in many cases. But this is going to be really, here's a draft statement. How would you edit it? What would you add to it? What do you like, not like? It's going to be interesting to hear from the community on that. But it's going to be an affirmation and feedback as opposed to here's 4 or 5 choices. Any comments on that approach?
I like it. I think it's a good approach. Not that there couldn't be others, but I'd much rather give somebody something to react to,
right?
And force them to say, "God, I hate this," or yeah, it's okay, or maybe you do this, as opposed to 5 or 6 that you pick choices from. I mean, that I don't know that would get us anywhere. Put something up there,
yeah.
Let them throw mud at it or whatever.
And we have other topics where there's going to be the 3 or 4 different choices, et cetera, et cetera. This is one where it's perhaps better just to have a draft. And if people want to go off and write their own, feel free to chime in, right?
Yep.
Or edit. Okay. So I think next one here, community character. So this is essentially the same slide we had back in December, and how we approach this in terms of actual tools. The open house will reapproach you with that for the February study session, but there's different topics under community character: utilities, streets, fencing, lighting, open space, view corridors, historic preservation of public art. There's this kind of range of input we've seen in the surveys between the rustic and pastoral and the upscale and suburban. So I imagine this might elicit some comments and discussion about how we approach that at the second open house. Is it, I think we do have direction on some of these aspects here. Others, maybe it's still a mixed bag. For example, lighting and dark skies seems pretty clear on the input from the community and the different survey responses. Under overhead utilities, pretty straightforward, but Earl, to your point you've made many times, perhaps this is the opportunity to say, okay, but are you willing to pay for it, right?
Right, and I think we have to do that. I mean,
right,
because otherwise then we won't have a basis, because we're hearing from people that they really want it. And so therefore, you really want it and it's not in there. You go, why isn't it in there? Well, because they also turned around and said they won't pay for it.
It's a great opportunity this time to just say, okay, are you willing to put your literally money where your mouth is, right?
Right.
I could envision some version of this being through the public input to date. We've heard that undergrounding overhead utilities has a lot of support throughout the community. However, there's a cost associated with that. Would you be in favor of A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever it is, right? Through taxation, through seeking donations or blah blah blah, right? What none, right? Whatever that might be is really drawing their attention to, okay, you say this is important, but we have to fund it.
Right. A couple of these topics overlap with other areas within the open house, like local streets. That's Elliot's area of expertise glomps over into the urban design aspect to some extent, for example, right? Open space view corridors is somewhat character urban design, but also it's a park and open space, system discussion as well. Any other comments on these various aspects? And again, we'll want to come back and, at the next study session, and not every little detail for the open house will be sussed out, but to Paul's point, we'll be presenting, here's how we think we should approach how to really nail this down for this topic and this topic and that topic.
And big picture, this is going to be one of the stations that is less affirmational and more teasing of okay, or exploration of here's what we heard. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Here's the implication, or here's the reality. Are you okay with that? This is going to be one of those stations that's going to have a few layers to it.
A little more to chew on this one, yes.
Right.
I have one suggestion, maybe addition: open space, view corridors, and trails.
Okay.
I will say, let me just ask a clarifying question there, because we will have parks, trails, and open space as part of its own station, as it will be its own quote unquote chapter in there. Is there something are you focused on how the trails would contribute to the community character? Because that's really what we're focused on in this. And I just want to clarify that.
Yeah, I think trails is a huge part of the community character.
And I agree with you.
In Cherry Hills Village.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Land use is a very simple one. It's not the wrong term, but it's pretty straightforward. Here's what we heard from you all. Your preferred land use direction is pretty plainly low density, single family residential. And I think we'll get a bunch of green stars and thumbs up on this one.
Right.
Transportation. This, along with the character and parks and open space and a couple other ones, also has some different layers to dive into. There's topics to explore with the public at the second round of community engagement. Are there certain design improvements that would be preferred in terms of how to slow and minimize traffic, and to really improvements that would best suit the balance between minimizing cut-through traffic and also providing access to arterials? Are there actual improvements to main arterials to draw traffic off local streets? Keeping in mind that obviously many of the main arterials are CDOT facilities.
Right.
Are there certain ways to provide additional separation of bikes and pedestrians from travel lanes? That's where it may be more of a visual exercise. Again, a kind of a bridge between transportation and urban design, where we have some choices that are contextually appropriate for this community. And then finally, are there ways to explore, ways we should explore to minimize conflicts among different trail users? Those conflicts were coming through in the survey responses again and again and again. Elliot, do you have anything to add in terms of your background of concerning these points?
Yeah, one thing we wanted to tease out a little bit your interest in is on the first one, that's stating specifically improvements to slow and minimize traffic. Is there interest in also adding something about spot improvements to intersections for congestion and safety purposes. Earl, what you were talking about before about the balance. I remember in the survey, we asked, what's your level of interest in exploring intersection improvements such as new turn lanes, roundabouts, or traffic signals to reduce congestion at key intersections? And it was about split. There was a plurality of people that said yes. Highly interested or somewhat interested was like 47%, and neutral was 15%, and then uninterested was less than half. So, one question we wanted to ask is the extent that you'd like to sort of tease out interest in the congestion, safety mitigation part of the balance on that one.
Right, the spot improvements, that is consistently what we termed initially a mixed results on transportation topics. But even though the word roundabout was inserted into that particular question about, I forget the exact question number, but about those spot improvements, intersections, it actually attracted the most interest in the survey.
To answer the point, I think that the question Elliot had, I think it's important. I think, I would tease them out. I'd support that.
Yeah, I would too.
Okay. Anything to add on these?
Hearing none.
All right. And then parks and open space. Topics for discussion at second open house: the preservation of natural areas, native trees, shrubs, plants, and grasses. Where should there be perhaps more trails and connections? Are there choices in that regard? The preservation of open spaces. Are there strategic enhancements to park facilities in terms of playgrounds, shelters, etc.? And should we make sure that children have facilities? So, and this actually ties back to earlier discussion in terms of defining what the word natural means, and really sussing out that topic of playgrounds and whether we should have any bells and whistles and what open space really means.
Sounds good.
Okay.
I might add one thing here that I think is consistent with the theme of nature and natural areas, and that is wildlife habitat.
Yep.
Seems like that could be worked into this list somewhere.
Okay.
Well, that's certainly one to gauge the community view on, because it varies from place to place. So,
yeah,
certainly does, in view of the fact that the city has hired an outfit with dogs to chase the geese work areas. I think that's an area which could be quite content.
Okay.
Okay. Do we want to
Now-
flesh out the idea of active versus passive recreation? I know, and Britt, you can speak to this, but I know that was kind of split, not very evenly, but I know a few people wanted to discuss active recreation.
And that comes through in the discussion about park facilities, playgrounds, shelters,
Okay.
etc. But I think that's
5 and
definitely
6.
on,
Yeah.
on target.
Do
yeah.
we want to, and the city's moving forward now on a new plan with the land preserve, but as part of this parks and open space, do we want as a separate topic Quincy Farm and because it's such a big item, or do we just kind of blend it into all of these subtopics? And
I'm
Let me
afraid of
ask
what
you
the
this-
answer would be, Earl. What if they want to go in another direction? Then what?
well, I know, but I mean,
I know. I'm being a little flippant more than anything. So
no, I mean, hey, as an attorney, that's the old line, right? Don't, if you can't stand the answer, don't ask the question.
In the matter of Quincy Farm, Earl, because that area or that subject has received, I think, a lot of coverage, but also has some rather substantial financial implications.
Yes.
I think you might want to let that sleeping dog lie. I wouldn't raise it here because it could be raised sufficient amount of dissension, contention, whatever you want to call it, that you might lose the momentum you have on the other items on the list.
I might ask the question there, the number of people who made this comment is probably still less than a dozen, but Earl, I know you've studied this survey. There were certainly people who said, why isn't anything being discussed concerning Quincy Farm, right? Perhaps it makes sense to put forward a statement about where we are with Quincy Farm, right?
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'd be supportive of that, Britt.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it needs to be mentioned. I don't think you can just ignore it.
I would agree.
But it could be a simple statement to the effect of, continue to work with the city and the land preserve to figure out the optimal use of Quincy Farm.
But I don't know if that's one that we would put on our question board, right? It would be more the fact that this is one that's been established, if you will. And here's where we're at with it.
It's background information.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. That's fine.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, Jay, back to infrastructure. So we might, for the second open house, there are potential details and feedback we can gain concerning potential municipal stormwater management, and in the vein of what we discussed about 20 minutes ago, perhaps it's feedback and affirmation concerning that policy and direction, right? And then the question.
Yeah, that's one of.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Jay, go ahead.
We're one of the few municipalities now that don't have a stormwater utility. So I don't know if we want to talk about costs for that or how we may talk about that, but it's something we need to work out and see because as we get more and more mandates from the federal government and how our MS4 needs to be run and what we have to do, we're going to have to find ways to fund our stormwater management.
Jay, what if I agree with you completely? This is sort of this, when you look down the road, it's this thing that's coming up and you sort of wonder what it might mean. But I almost wonder if it needs its own study, its own effort, its own community-based thing.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. We need to do a study on what it would take.
Because then we could have information for the public. Whereas right now we're sort of flying blind a little bit. So maybe a potential action, the lowest level on the hierarchy is something along the lines of exploring this utility. And that way it's not necessarily, it's not a thumbs up or thumbs down that we are or are not going to do it. We're just going to explore it or explore it with the public, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea because you're right. We don't have a lot of information as to, what would it cost and,
right.
How are we going to calculate that? And we don't have a lot of detailed information and mapping yet. So I agree. I think that's a great idea that we mention it as we're going to study this in the future and then, bring it up and talk to the public about it, but at least mention it here that this is an issue that we're going to have to deal with in the future.
Well, and I will say of all the topics in all of the chapters, my sense, and that's all this is a sense, is that this is the one that folks understand the least. And so I think there has to be, again, my opinion, is some type of educational effort before people can really respond in a meaningful way. Because I think people start hearing municipal stormwater management and their eyes just glaze over and they don't understand what that is, what the benefits are, what the costs are, or any of that. So
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think an educational component for that would be important.
Well, this is one of those ones where when we looked at the guiding principles by themselves, they sometimes didn't make total sense. But when you apply the layers below them, you suddenly start to understand. I believe we had a guiding principle, Britt, that talked about efficient work with our regional partners on efficient stormwater management, blah, blah, blah. If we do end up with a guiding principle like that, then it makes all the sense in the world to have a goal or an action, or maybe it's a goal that says explore with the public, a stormwater utility. And that way, some of that education could come out through that process instead of having to bring the entire community up from ground zero in the midst of this master plan.
All right, that makes sense to me.
Right.
I agree with all of the comments you guys are making. However, I think this issue is coming at us a lot faster than we think. And therefore I think we should be proactive and not act as if we're just convening the early study sessions to understand it. There's been a lot of work done by the Highline Canal and Denver Water on this, and the regional stormwater authority. So I think we need to be proactive and take it head on and not think that it's a year or 2 or 3 down the road, because it's not.
Well, unfortunately or fortunately, Mike, that approach is happening so much that some of that work is going to actually be done prior to the master plan being completed. Jay, you might want to just mention the study that we're doing.
Yeah, so the High Line is one small portion of the stormwater in the city.
Sure.
So yes, I know we need to move forward quickly on the High Line, and we are. Council will be approving a contract next week to bring on an engineering firm, and we will be doing a detailed study of the stormwater management specifically on the High Line. So we can tie all of that back to the regional plan that the Highline Conservancy has put together. So that portion of it, we will have a lot more information on. It's the bigger picture stuff of all of our stormwater throughout the city that is going to take a lot more work and is too big for this to try to even tackle it before this master plan. But yes, the Highline portion of that planning will be hopefully complete before the master plan is done.
Okay, good. Got it. So we should just clearly distinguish between the difference in those two aspects of stormwater management.
So the other thing mentioned on this slide, beyond these 2 bullet points, tying back to the guiding principles discussion, it seemed that getting people's reaction to that draft set of guiding principles for infrastructure would be a good thing to do at the second open house. That's not listed here, but a bit of education and affirmation or input on those directions. Right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Moving
Last
along.
one. Topics. So actually, I think this again ties back to the guiding principle, which had a little more meat on it than these bullet points here. The term we were using internally was common sense sustainability. Like sustainability, we're not looking, our sense is that the community is not looking for really detailed sustainability planning that goes down to the level of, again, climate action plans or carbon audits, so on and so forth. But it's, again, 2-pronged from the guiding principles. 1, what in terms of city operations, and then 2, that topic of how to encourage or facilitate individuals and businesses to become more sustainable, right? And we'll have to work on what that means for the second open house in terms of choices here of how to really approach that word of encourage. Commissioner Lemaire, you're on the top of my screen. Do you have comments?
I think it looks pretty good.
Okay.
I guess I have a concern about common sense sustainability, because that implies that that you do a cost benefit analysis on it, and your solar panels pay you back within 5 years or whatever. And I think in some cases, there's going to be an economic cost to achieve what you want to what your objective is, that may not pay itself back in easily understandable economic terms. So,
right.
Mike, I think that's true. I think that's an excellent observation. I think what Britt is trying to somehow get us to articulate is that there seemed to be more momentum, more wide based on and again, I would encourage everybody to go look at the more detailed analysis of the survey that was sent out. But I was certainly surprised at the amount of interest just on the topic in general, but then some of the specifics that people brought up. And so, I don't think it's as far as some of the things that Britt mentioned regarding carbon audits and things like that. We didn't hear about that. But what we did hear about is taking an increment up, a step up compared to where we are now.
Right.
So if, common sense sustainability is probably not the right label, but what I think Britt is trying to do, and I think it's a good instinct, is how can we communicate to folks that, we're easy. We're not trying to, outdo Boulder here. We're not going to be coming into your hot water heaters and force you to, rip out your old innovative. We're not doing that. But what we do want to do is say, hey, we do want to take the next step, whatever that step is. So whatever label that should be, we certainly are open to it. In fact, you got a lot of smart people. If you guys think of one, that'd be great. But the big picture idea is confirming that the community supports going to that next step.
Yes, and I think we all know, kind of back to the comments on don't tell me what to do with my own property. There's that sort of mindset out here, and that's fine. But what that means to me is the program should be a program of education and incentivizing people to do things, not mandating them to do certain things on the environmental topic. So I'd really like to encourage, the use of education and incentives in this whole discussion here.
I can't quote the exact number of comments, but you got the general sense from a lot of comments on sustainability. And again, the term common sense maybe goes away, but people are making comments that, gosh, my friends in Denver, they can compost or recycle. They don't have this option here in the village right now for the folks who are into it, the folks who want to be more green, right?
Well, and I think as in the same vein as Mr. Holland said earlier, we need to, just like undergrounding, okay, you want to recycle, compost, what are you willing to pay? The city doesn't have funding right now to just have a composting program. What are you willing to pay for these things?
Because it's going to involve additional staff. It's going to involve equipment.
Contractors. But I don't
by the way, while
because we all want recycling and composting, but what are we willing to pay for that?
Right. And in addition to paying for it, by the way, this is something that flows through all of these discussions, all of the topics about paying, is we need to also make sure that we're hitting on prioritization. I mean, in other words, we're willing to pay for some stuff. All right, well then what is that? What is that prioritization of these various things that you are willing to pay for, and how does that go down? Because obviously the city's gonna be able to do some things going forward. You just can't do everything.
Earl, I know that that's a huge issue for city council. They're very interested in this plan doing a better job at prioritizing these than the last one did.
Right.
So I don't know. We give us a chance to talk about that. Maybe we even have a separate station or table or question or something that, when you get done going through the gauntlet, maybe we then ask you to sort of prioritize some categories at least, or maybe potential projects. I don't know, something,
Right.
rank them or
And that's
something.
one way to do it. And the other way is that, like I say, this is just an overarching concept that we all need to have inculcated in ourselves when we're manning these stations to make sure that it's always part of the discussion. But we could have a separate table as well, as you're talking about. But it just needs to be always part of the discussion. So
I agree, Earl, and I think that we don't have that reflected here today. We probably need to somehow get that into this next open house.
right.
Any other comments on this one?
Hearing none. Come on. There we go. All right, everybody take a deep breath. The real meat of the meeting is behind us. And I do want to genuinely thank you all. That was a great conversation. We have what we need to move forward. And to that, we will continue to work on concepts and ideas and presentation materials and things like that for your next study session next month on February 8th. We do have one bit of work, and Jay can tell you what it is without going into too much detail, but essentially it's a request for some right-of-way vacation. We don't anticipate that to take overly long, but you'll have one regular agenda item, and then most of the meeting will be focused on the upcoming open house, whether that's in late February or early March. And I intentionally skipped the second one. And the collective, we sort of had this conversation to kick off while we were kind of waiting for everybody to arrive. Is right now we're scheduled to have a CAT meeting next Thursday, January 20th. We've had 2 of those meetings so far. One of them was entirely in person with no online option. The second one we had was a mix of in-person and online. Obviously, we are virtual this evening at the direction of City Council and to their boards and commissions, as well as their own requirement to go virtual for their next meeting. Chris and I have talked a little bit about this. It's a little bit different for these other committees that have already, we've already made commitments about having these meetings. And so we wanted to discuss with this group and get your thoughts in terms of, do we keep the meeting and do some sort of hybrid format? Do we keep the meeting and just do virtual? Do we move the meeting? Really, those are the 3 that come to my mind. There's probably others out there. So we are looking for direction from this group about how we, I guess, approach that next meeting. I will say I did speak with one member of the CAT meeting, and they expressed a desire to not have a virtual only format. At the minimum, do a hybrid format. And their strong preference was to do in person, where we could spread out within council chambers more so than we have historically. But they very much want to keep the meeting on the 20th and either do an in-person or a hybrid at the very least format. So
Was that the only
feedback that I heard from
to your email?
Yeah. That's correct. Yeah.
Well,
So,
I thought that hybrid meeting was not good, and for 2 reasons. And partly because of the people that were there, and partly because of the nature of the thing. But if you're going to have the hybrid meeting, everybody that's in person needs to be talking into that microphone. And that was like
Directly into that microphone.
Exactly. That was like the Keystone Cops watching everybody do that. Because then I can't hear anything. Is anybody there? And part of this thing is obviously we want to get the feedback of the cat. It's very important. But in addition to that, I think it's important that the members of the cat that are non-planning and zoning people feel that this is of value. And I'll be honest, when I walked out of that hybrid meeting, I thought, man, if this wasn't good. So I think, if we can't have this meeting in person, then it probably needs to be moved. And if we can't have it in person, I think that's the only way that we have it. And there ain't no hybrid.
Well, so let me clarify, and Chris, you can jump in if I misrepresent this, but when I say that Chris and I have talked, and for those folks or for those meetings that we know had previous commitments before council direction and because council direction was just last week, we are open to an in-person type format, but keep in mind that that's going to come with some pretty significant distancing directions. We probably will still want to use the microphone so that everybody in the room can hear each other.
Yeah, that's fine.
Or we go to Douglas County.
The other thing, just to keep in mind, and maybe this is okay, again, it's the reality of what we have to deal with. But if we do hold off because we want to have a more safe in-person meeting, it might necessitate pushing back the next open house by whatever the same time frame is. Maybe that's okay. Again, there is no external force pressing down on us that we have an external deadline. On the other hand,
other than we still, there's already been a long pause in this.
Yeah.
And I don't want to misrepresent, but when we had our study session with city council last week, there's definite interest in getting the plan done this year.
Right.
They do not want this to drag on.
The good news is,
and by the way, don't get me wrong in my comments. I'm not advocating moving it. If it's me,
sure,
I'd say have the meeting unless something changes drastically from here and all of a sudden, hell, everybody's like in their deathbed. But I mean, if it was today, knowing what I know about COVID right now and in terms of what's happening in Colorado, I'd have the in-person meeting today. So if it doesn't get any worse than it is right now, I say have it.
I'm with you, Earl.
Agreed.
I agree with that as well. I don't think a Zoom call works for this type of a meeting.
Okay. Is there any other commissioners on the line that want to chime in on that? Since I'm sharing my screen, I can't see everybody that's still on. So
yeah, I chimed in. I support Mike and Earl on that.
Okay.
Britta had to drop off. I saw her note.
Okay.
Yeah, I did too. Yeah.
Okay, then we will proceed forward with the meeting on January 20th in person. We will ask folks to wear masks. We will space the room as much as we can for safety purposes. And like I said, we will probably still ask folks to use mics just so everyone in the room can hear. So
Yep, that's fine.
Okay.
By the way, when do we have a date for the second open house?
The short answer is I have an internal date, but I'm not willing, I'm willing to share it. I just want to share it publicly before we had the conversation with you all tonight. Because if we had to, if you all wanted to move the CAT meeting and then subsequently move the next open house, I didn't want to create confusion. But what I can do is, now that we have this information, is let myself and Britt and Chris just confirm the date that I have in mind, and then we will be sure to let you all know here in the next few days.
Yeah, and be mindful of spring break.
Yes. Yeah.
Coming up.
Just FYI, the date that I had in mind was in late February before we start to hit the spring break season. So, but we'll let us put our heads together and make sure that nothing's changed in terms of the calendar that would require us to move that. So
Perfect.
Good.
So that is really all we have in terms of formal presentation materials or discussion topics or anything like that. Again, this fantastic discussion. We'll probably see most of you at the meeting next week with the CAT meeting, but I guess I want to give the consultant team an opportunity to share any other information they think is relevant. And then Chris, if you have anything else to share, and then the commission, if you all have anything. So Britt and Elliot, if you all have any other thoughts or statements or anything.
No, there's quite a bit to chew on here. Again, very helpful in advancing the drafts of this material. This was a very great discussion, and we'll get even more input next week from the CAT.
Okay. Chris, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I thought it was a good conversation as always. This group always brings it.
You all can laugh at me, but I love having these meetings because these are, to do these things is why you go to planning school, right? It's what lights your fire to do this. It's not always reviewing building permits. So to have these conversations is great. So I appreciate it. So,
Whatever turns you on, Paul.
that's exactly
There
right.
you
We
go.
all have our own thing, right?
Good luck if you want to submit a building permit and Paul has to review it. He clearly doesn't care.
Just
Just gonna send it in.
request Ethan review it.
What time is the CAT meeting? I'm sure I should know that. But I've
I
got
want to say it's 5:30, but let me confirm that.
Okay.
It's,
Yeah, that's what I
Yes,
have.
it's 5:30.
Okay.
Perfect.
Well, thanks, guys. Good job.
Thank you all. Very good job.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks,
Yep.
everyone.
all right, thanks so much.
Good
Ready?
evening.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Yep.